This episode contains mature content that may be sensitive for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Realm presents Tales Beyond Time, Episode 17.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome back to Tales Beyond Time, presented by Realm. I'm Marco Palmieri, back with more unsettling adventures. We have two stories for you this week, a pair of dark and disturbing tales from Thoraiya Dyer and Nisi Shawl. A four-time winner of the Ditmar Award and five-time Aurelius Award winner, Australian writer Thoraiya Dyer is well known for her inventive world-building and strong characterizations. This week's story, Bahamut, originally appearing in the 2014 anthology Fantasine from Fablecroft Publishing and narrated for Realm by Chanté McComick, is no exception. The royal widow had been a priestess once, but powerful magic demands sacrifice, and as her kingdom faces destruction, she must choose what to give up. Without further ado, I give you Bahamut.
Bahamut. They brought the bodies to the palace, hoping the widow could explain them. She'd been a priestess once. The widow watched her daughter, Sistah, a moment longer through an arched marble window of the outer court. Sistah, aged 7 and 10, listed to one side of her ferocious war horse, but she was stubborn. She seemed intent on jumping the final fountain or falling in the attempt. Angels, guard her, the widow thought as the horse bunched his haunches for the leap. Sistah splayed over its arched neck as they left the ground. Rear hooves caught the surge of water where it left the lion's mouth. Spray flecked the horse's foamy hide. Sistah's rear end rammed back into the saddle, and the widow released a long, relieved breath. "My lady," her soldiers reminded her quietly, and she turned away from the window, following them through a maze of gardens to the stables where the bodies were laid. None of the bodies had feet. All the blood had been drained out of them through their bitten-off ankles. "They are goat herders. Their wives and mothers said they took their goats down to the river to drink, same as every other day, my lady. The animals died of blood loss, same as the men. Nobody saw what unholy servant of the underworld did the deed." The royal widow bit her lip hard. "Bahamut," she whispered. It was 18 years since she'd called the waters to the Valley of Mirages, and only now, why now, angels protect us, that a Bahamut, one of the fish on whose backs the world rested, had raised its head to drink. The dead king, Waji, had loved this land even more than he had loved the widow herself. He had entrusted its care to her. If word should reach the common people that a Bahamut had come, they would flee. Waji's kingdom fragmented forever. Sistah's birthright would be no more. "What did you say, my lady?" "Never mind what I said. Obey me now. Take 77 copper cauldrons to the opposite side of the river. Fill them with water and set fires beneath them. When the first cauldron is boiled, have it emptied into the river and refilled. Then the second cauldron, and then the third. Let boiled water flow into the river day and night." "Yes, my lady." And then, because this soldier had been born of fishermen before his family name came out of the lottery that caused him to be handed over to the palace, he added, "Boiling water will kill all the fish." "Not all of them," the widow said. She looked at the lifeless limbs of the dead herders, haunted by the paleness of them like beasts bled for butchery, and remembered what her mother and teacher, the old priestess, had written of the Bahamut. "They drink the blood of the earth, which they find by following hot running water. When they cannot find the earth's blood near the surface, they drink the blood of men." The widow went to the guest quarters where 3 suitors for Sanaya's hand had been waiting weeks for the widow's decision. The youngest and most hopeless of these suitors was a prince of the island kingdom, Wisdom, which was soon to be destroyed. The volcano on whose slopes the city had sheltered for hundreds of years was recently reawakened. Prince Bez loved his comforts, the widow surmised, and if his inheritance was to be wrecked by God's judgment, he would leap across the little inland sea that separated Wisdom from the Valley of Mirages and help himself to the next closest kingdom. She laughed aloud at his insolence, laughed even louder at the desperation which forced her to turn to him and the happiness with which Sanaya must greet her choice, for foppish Vez was her favorite. I should never have sent her to be tutored in wisdom, the widow thought tiredly. She waited barely an instant after the door slave had announced her before gliding across the mosaic tiles and into the prince's guest room. Vez had a thin, oval-shaped head covered in dense, dark stubble. His short hair became short sideburns, which became short beard. In short, he looked like a small boulder, with an unusually sharp and noble nose, teetering on hidden stilts and wearing the light but finely made robes of royalty. "You will marry my daughter," the widow said, courteously hiding her assessment of him, as always, "on one condition. After you have taken her with you back to Wisdom, to be queen in waiting, as you are king in waiting, you will send your firstborn back here to be heir to the Valley of Mirages." He looked at her with wincing, appalled kindness. "Great Queen," he said, "you forget what the soothsayers have said, that Wisdom will be destroyed within weeks." "You forget that I was a priestess," the widow snapped. "I will prevent the destruction of Wisdom if you will give me your word with regards to the child, male or female. You must send it. And if my daughter remains barren for longer than 1 year, you will see that she is seated by another of her choice, for she is fertile, as the working of the simple spells I have taught her easily proves." Bez seemed taken aback by that last possibility and mulled it over for a moment before bowing sharply to her. "You have my word, honored widow." "Then take the news to her. She's in the outer courtyard. I will order a caravan to assemble immediately for our journey to Wisdom. It would not do to arrive there too late." It was not St. George who slew the monster. No, even though this statue shows the Roman skewering the Bahamut with his spear. The people here were saved by a queen who was a priestess before she came to the Valley of Mirages. She had no name because to name a thing is to tame and control it, and her mother, who was also a priestess, understood this and did not wish to hobble her child. I will tell you how the nameless woman came to be queen. Prince Waji of the Valley of Mirages was cursed by a warlock. In his youth, Waji had gone on a long and adventurous journey across great deserts and through distant jungles. In one of those jungles, he'd heard legends of the unicorn and set his heart on bringing back one of the fabled beast's horns. After a month of fruitless searching, with no trace of his intended prey, in his frustration, he struck dead with his spear a milk cow belonging to a wrinkled old farmer. But the farmer was a warlock, and his curse was this, that Prince Waji should have the power to choose the sex of his next child, and that he should father either a single healthy daughter or 4 healthy sons. After that, his life would be spent, and he would die instantly. The prince laughed at the warlock, for it did not seem like such a terrible curse, and decided secretly that he would father 3 sons before living to a ripe old age. By the time Waji was king, though, the rains in the Valley of Mirages had dried up, and the people of his kingdom were dying of thirst. The nameless priestess came to his lands, one who had the power to call clear springs from the dust. Waji begged her to be his bride, but she would agree only if he consented to father a daughter on her. for her gifts could only be inherited by a female child. The king consented, and the daughter was born, and the father died instantly, and the priestess became a widow. But before he died, his wife had stood on the side of a dune and diverted a river on the side of a distant snowy mountain, and long after his death, the people of the valley came at dusk to fill their leather bags and lead their camels to the water's edge to slake their thirst. The widow usually slept alone. She had her own tent, her own cook, and her own serving women. She was used to being alone. The study of magic was a lonely calling, and she'd been bereft of a lover since her husband had died. On the journey from the Valley of Mirages to the island kingdom of wisdom, she asked her daughter, Sanaya, to share a tent with her. "You don't trust me to keep my honor?" Sanaya blared. "You think I will sneak into Prince Fez's tent before he has made me his proper wife?" "No," the widow said quietly. "It is because I will miss you when you are Queen of Wisdom." And Sanaya's temper cooled, and she came without a grudge into her mother's tent. "This is my last chance to make memories for us both," the widow thought. "But which one of us will lose the memories we make tonight?" "It is too cold," Sanaya said, impatiently tugging the heavy tapestry flaps closed. "The wind must move freely through here," the widow said, sighing, rising from her cushions to draw the flaps back and tie them. "I must stay connected to water." Sanaya stared at her. "And I? You never taught me to call water." "Soon you'll be surrounded by seas." "Why didn't you teach me?" "Because of the price to be paid," the widow said sadly. "My father already paid the price," Sanaya observed, wrapping herself in furs. "He died because you wanted a daughter to inherit your gifts. For what? All you taught me was how to channel dewdrops into the soil to keep crops alive without rain. I was already of age before you showed me how to take the water from my skin and hair and return it to the bath so that the water would not be wasted. Those are powerful spells. Not as powerful as the one you used to bring the river that runs through the valley. And what spell will you use to save wisdom for my Fez? Will you quench the fires of the volcano with the ocean itself? Tell me." "I have written letters," the widow said faintly. "They hold all the magic that I know, everything that my mother taught me, and everything I discovered on my own. It is all written down." "When will I get these letters?" "When you have forgotten me, or when I have forgotten you." Wind brought the smell of the desert between them. Soil, saltbush, shed snake scales, the bones of birds, secret flowers, and thorny stored water. "You're senile already," Sanaya scowled. "You think I could ever forget you?" There are some witches who work with denizens of the underworld. Others use the inner sanctums of their wombs, never violated, as a source of magical power. The unnamed priestess who became queen of the Valley of Mirages had been schooled in one of the most ancient ways, the use of memories to move great bodies of water. But what are memories but pathways of water in the mind? The queen herself had no memory of the mother who had taught her, for the price of the most powerful spells is this. Every time a priestess uses her magic to call water, the person who loves her most in the world forgets her, forgets who she is and all her deeds, and everything about her, including her name and her face. The very moment that the nameless queen called the water to the drought-stricken valley, her lovesick husband forgot he was married. He turned cold towards her, a foreign witch beneath his roof. He locked the pregnant stranger away in a remote room of the palace, and the servants feared to tell him that he was the father of her daughter, lest he slaughter the priestess out of hand to save his own life, remembering the warlock's curse but not the bargain he'd made. Princess Sanaya was born through blood and water. And King Waji died, alone and frightened, without wife or child at his bedside to console him, oblivious to the fact he had agreed to sacrifice himself to save his people. The kingdom of wisdom was a jewel in a toothless sea. The widow looked over her gloved hands, holding the horse's reins to a sheer drop at the edge of the coast, across a turquoise channel that could have been swum in 3 or 4 hours by a servant in excellent health. The volcanic isle with its rich farmlands and whitewashed tiered city looked strangely lonely. And the widow realized that the boats were gone. Everybody who owned one had taken it and fled. The city was subtly grayed with ash, and the mountain rumbled deep in its belly. "Are you certain you can make it safe, Mother?" Sanaya whispered, having drawn her horse so close that the 2 mares' shoulders were touching. "I am certain," the widow said. "Send your husband-to-be ahead to the city to deliver the news of your engagement. I will stay here. The spell will work best from here and will be best performed at twilight." She did not tell Sanaya that Fez carried certain letters to be signed. The agreement between Wisdom and the Valley of Mirages would be unbreakable once Fez had gotten his father's seal. That's if Fez remembers to get them signed. "I'll go with Fez," Sanaya said. "No, I need you." But the widow's heart twisted in her chest. She still had not decided. Should I teach the spell to Sanaya? Should she be the one to cast it? The widow suspected that she was the one who loved Sanaya more than anyone else in the world. If that was the case, and Sanaya cast the spell, the widow would lose every memory of her unfocused, bleary blue gaze at birth, so startled by her first breath that she made a hiccuping sound like laughter instead of the usual baby's first cry. Of her antics in the nursery, pretending to be a camel, spitting at the widow, and then shrieking as her bottom was paddled in retribution. Of her writing Fez's name in the sand with her slipper, and then scrubbing it out when she thought the widow might see. Ah, Fez, my useful monkey. Here was the root of the widow's indecision. What if Fez loved Sanaya more than anyone else in the world? What if the price to be paid was the loosening of the repellent attraction between Sanaya and the only Prince of Wisdom to fail the entrance exam to his own royal academy? It was a tempting thought, a wicked thought, a useless wish. He cannot love her more than I do. I must cast the spell myself. But what would be worse? To completely forget one's beloved, or to have them forget you? When the sun was almost down, the widow summoned her daughter and gave her the chest full of letters. "This is all my knowledge," she said. "You can see that the lid is inscribed. You must not open the box until after you are wed. Now, embrace your mother, and then extinguish the fire and the lamps. When the magic is woven, we will part. You will go to Fez in wisdom, and I will return to the Valley of Mirages." The widow knew she was holding her daughter too tightly, that she might be betraying her knowledge that this would be the last time they would hold each other so closely, the last time their bonds would draw them fiercely to breathe each other's breath. In the gloom, she turned toward the sun's afterglow and fixed her gaze on the salty sea that separated wisdom from the desert. "Go deeper," she commanded it, and the water peeled apart the rocks on the seafloor. It probed the underwater portion of the volcano, meeting the molten stone that was the lifeblood of the world, the preferred food of the Bahamut. The water turned to steam, and the widow bored beneath the desert with a spear of superheated water, all the way from the place where she stood to the place on the river where her servants had attracted the Bahamut with their boiling cauldrons. 2 places were connected now, the Valley of Mirages and the volcano beneath the Kingdom of Wisdom. The ground shook. Camels and servants fell to the floor. Tents shuddered and ropes snapped. Sanaya cried out, "What is happening?" "The great fish turns," the widow said. "Far below, the Bahamut smells something much more tempting than hot human blood." She felt tired, but the channel of steam had to stay open until the Bahamut was completely turned around and both kingdoms were saved. Stars wheeled in the sky. More earthquakes came, but none powerful enough to cause serious damage to the distant, ash-covered city. At last, the sun rose over a volcanic isle strangely quiescent. The exhausted widow could sense the Bahamut drinking deeply of the lava, removing the danger to the people of both Wisdom and the valley. Ash no longer drifted ominously around the terraced buildings and streets. "A city of knowledge, where my daughter will be queen," the widow thought. Then, without daring to look on the blank features of her best beloved, the daughter that no longer remembered her, the widow gathered her servants and returned to the Valley of Mirages, where the river ran pure and free of the blood of goats and men.
Here's the thing about stories. The ones you remember are those that ask questions that stay with you long after you first experience them. And for me, when Thoraiya Dyer asks us, what would be worse, to completely forget one's beloved or to have them forget you, that's when I knew Bahamut would be a story I wouldn't soon forget. Our next story is by Tiptree Award-winning writer and editor Nisi Shawl, a powerful voice in feminism and Afrofuturism. Their ghost story, Cruel Sistah, was originally published in 2005 in Asimov Science Fiction and is narrated for Realm by Robin Ray Eller. It was selected for the 19th edition of the year's best fantasy and horror. Cruel, cruel Sistah, black and white and red, you hated me, you had to see me dead. Keep the lights on as you listen to Cruel Sistah.
You and Neville going out again? I think so. He asked could he call me Thursday after class. Calliope looked down at her sister's long, straight, silky hair. It fanned out over Calliope's knees and fell almost to the floor. A black river drying up just short of its destined end. Why don't you let me wash this for you? It takes too long to dry. Just braid it up like you said, okay? Your head all full of dandruff, Calliope lied. And ain't you ever heard of a hairdryer? Mary Lockett lent me her portable. Mama says those things bad for your hair. Dory shifted uncomfortably on the sofa cushion, laid on the hardwood floor where she sat. Dory, short for Dorcas, was the darker-skinned of the 2 girls. Darker by far than their mama or their daddy. Some kind of throwback, the aunts called her. Mama doted on Dory's hair, though, acting sometimes as if it was her own. Not too surprising, seeing how good it was. Also, a nervous breakdown 8 years back had made Mama completely bald. Alopecia was the doctor's word for it, and there was no cure. So Mama made sure both her daughters took care of their crowning glories, but especially Dory. All right, no dryer, Calliope conceded. We can go out in the back garden and let the sun help dry it. 'Cause in fact I was gonna rinse it with rainwater, save us hauling it inside. Daddy had installed a flexible hose on the kitchen sink. Calliope wet her sister's hair down with warm jets of water, then massaged in sweet-smelling shampoo. White suds covered the gleaming black masses, gathering out of nowhere like clouds. Dory stretched her neck and sighed. That feels nice. Nice as when Neville kisses you back there. Ow! Or over here. Ow, Callie, what you doing? Sorry, my finger slipped. Need to trim my nails, huh? Let's go rinse off. Blood from the cuts on her neck and ear streaked the shampoo clouds with pink stains. Unaware of this, Dory let her sister lead her across the red and white linoleum to the back porch and the creaky wooden steps down to the garden. She sat on the curved cement bench by the cistern, gingerly at first. It was surprisingly warm for spring. The sun shone, standing well clear of the box elders crowding against the retaining wall at the back of the lot. A silver jet flew high overhead, bound for SeaTac. The low grumble of its engines lagged behind it, obscuring Calliope's words. What? I said quit sitting pretty and help me move this lid. The cistern's cover came off with a hollow grating sound. A slice of water, a crescent like the waning moon, reflected the sun's brightness. Ripples of light ran up the damp stone walls. Most of the water lay in darkness, though. Cold smells seeped up from it. Mud, moss, mystery. As children, Dory, Calliope, and their cousins had been fascinated by the cistern. Daddy and Mama had forbidden them to play there, of course, which only increased their interest. When their parents opened it up to haul up water for the garden, the girls hovered close by, snatching glimpses inside. God damn if that no-good Byron ain't lost the bucket. Calliope cursed the empty end of the rope she'd retrieved from her side of the cistern. It was still curled where it had been tied to the handle of the beige plastic bucket. Byron, their 14-year-old cousin, liked to soak sticks and strips of wood in water to use in his craft projects. He only lived a block away, so he was always in and out of the basement workshop. You think he took it home again? Dory asked. No, I remember now. I saw it downstairs, full of some trash of his. Tree branches or something. Yeah, well, that's all right. We don't want to. I'll go get it and wipe it out good. Wait for me behind the garage. Oh, but he's always so upset when you mess with his stuff. It ain't his anyhow, is it? Calliope took the porch steps 2 at a time. She was a heavy girl, but light on her feet. Never grew out of her baby fat. Still, she could hold her own in a fight. The basement stairs, narrow and uneven, slowed her down a bit. Daddy had run a string from the bare bulb fixture at their bottom, looping it along the wooden wall of the stairwell. She pulled, and the chain at its other end slithered obediently against porcelain, clicked, and snapped back. Brightness flooded the lowering floor joists. Calliope ignored the beige bucket full of soaking willow wands. Daddy's tool bench. That's where she'd find what she wanted. Nothing too heavy, though. She had to be able to lift it. And not too sharp. She didn't want to have to clean up a whole lot of blood. Hammer? Pipe? Wrench? What if Mama got home early and found Calliope carrying one of those out of the house? What would she think? It came to her with the same sort of slide and snap that had turned the light on. Daddy was about to tear out the railroad ties in the retaining wall. They were rotten. They needed replacing. It was this week's project. The new ones were piled up at the end of the driveway. Smiling, Calliope selected a medium-sized mallet, its handle as long as her forearm, and added a crowbar for show. Outside, Dory wondered what was taking her sister so long. A clump of shampoo slipped down her forehead and along one eyebrow. She wiped it off, annoyed. She stood up from the weeds where she'd been waiting, then quickly knelt down again at the sound of footsteps on the paving bricks. Bend forward. Calliope's voice cracked. Dory began twisting her head to see why. The mallet came down hard on her right temple. It left a black dent in the suds, a hollow. She made a mewing sound, fell forward, eyes open, but blind. Another blow, well centered this time, drove her face into the soft soil. One more. Then Calliope took control of herself. "You did," she murmured, satisfied. A towel over her sister's head disguised the damage, hoisting her up into a sitting position and leaning her against the garage. Calliope hunkered back to look at her and think. No one was due home within the next couple of hours. For that long, her secret would be safe. Even then, she'd be all right as long as they didn't look out the kitchen windows. The retaining wall was visible from there, but if she had one of the new ties tamped in place and the dirt filled back in... A moment more she pondered. Fast-moving clouds flickered across the sun and her skin bumped up. There was no real reason to hang back. Waiting wouldn't change what she'd done. The first tie came down easily. Giant splinters sprung off as Calliope kicked it to one side. The second one, she had to dig the ends out. And the third was cemented in place, its full length by dried clay. Ants boiled out of the hundreds of holes that had been hidden behind it, and the phone rang. She wasn't going to answer it, but it stopped and started again, and she knew she'd better. Sweat had made mud of the dirt on her hands. She cradled the pale blue princess phone against one shoulder, trying to rub the mess clean on her shirt as she listened to Mama asking what was in the refrigerator. The cord barely stretched that far. Were they out of eggs? Butter? Lunch meat? Did Calliope think there was enough cornmeal to make hush puppies? Even with Byron coming over? And what were she and Dory up to that it took them so long to answer the phone? "Dory ain't come home yet." "No, I don't know why. She ain't told me. I was out in back, tearing down the retaining wall." Her mother's disapproving silence lasted 2 full seconds. "Why you always want to act so mannish, Calliope?" There wasn't any answer to that. She promised to change her clothes for supper. Outside again, ants crawled on her dead sister's skin. Dory didn't feel them. She saw them, though, from far off. Far up? What was going on didn't make regular sense. Why couldn't she hear the shovel digging? Whoever was lying there on the ground in Dory's culottes, with a towel over her head, it was someone else, not her. She headed for the house. She should be hungry. It must be supper time by now. The kitchen windows were suddenly shining through the dusk, and sure enough, Calliope was inside already cooking. In the downstairs bathroom, Daddy washed his hands with his sleeves rolled up. She kissed him. She did, on his cheek. She couldn't have missed it. The food looked good, good enough to eat. Fried chicken, the crisp ridges and golden valleys of its skin glowing under the ceiling light. Why didn't she want it? Her plate was empty. Nobody talked much. Nobody talked to her at all. There were a lot of leftovers. Cousin Byron helped Calliope clear the table. Daddy made phone calls with Mama listening in on the extension. She could see them both at the same time, in the kitchen and in their bedroom upstairs. She couldn't hear anything. Then the moon came out. It was bedtime, a school night. Everyone stayed up, though. And the police sat in the living room and moved their mouths till she got tired of watching them. She went in the backyard again, where all this weird stuff had started happening. The lid was still off the cistern. She looked down inside. The moon's reflection shone up at her, a full circle, uninterrupted by shadow. Not smooth, though. Waves ran through it, long like swirls, actually. Closer, she saw them clearly. Hairs. Her hairs. supple and fine. Suddenly, the world was in daylight again. Instead of the moon's circle, a face covered the water's surface. Her sister's face. Calliope's. Different. And at first, Dory couldn't understand why. Then she realized it was her hair. Her hair. Dory's own. A thin fringe of it hung around her big sister's face as if it belonged there. But it didn't. Several loose strands fell drifting towards Dory. And again, it was night, and day, and night. Time didn't stay still. Mostly it seemed to move in one direction. Mama kept crying. Daddy, too. Dory decided she must be dead. But what about heaven? What about the funeral? Byron moved into Dory's old room. It wasn't spooky. It was better than his mom's house. There, he could never tell who was going to show up for drinks or breakfast. He never knew who was going to start yelling and throwing things in the middle of the night. His mom, or some man she had invited over, or someone else she hadn't. Even before he brought his clothes, Byron had kept his instruments and other projects here. Uncle Marv's workshop was wonderful, and he let him use all his tools. His thing now was gimbries, elegant North African ancestors of the cigar box banjos he'd built 2 years ago when he was just beginning, just a kid. He sat on the retaining wall in the last lingering light of the autumn afternoon, considering the face, neck, and frame of his latest effort. A variant, like a violin, meant to be bowed. He'd pieced it together from the thin trunk of an elder tree, blown down in an August storm, sister to the leafless one still upright behind him. The basic structure looked good, but it was kind of plain. It needed some sort of decoration. An inlay, ivory or mother of pearl or something. The hide backing was important, obviously, but that could wait. It'd be easier to take care of the inlay first. Of course, real ivory would be too expensive. Herb David, who let him work in his guitar shop, said people used bone as a substitute. And he knew where some was. Small bits, probably from some dead dog or rabbit. They'd been entangled in the tree roots. He planned to make tuning pegs out of them. There'd be plenty, though. He stood up, and the world whited out. It had been doing that a lot since he moved here. The school nurse said he had low blood pressure. He just had to stand still a minute, and he'd be okay. The singing in his ears, that would stop too. But it was still going when he got to the stairs. Stubbornly, he climbed, hanging onto the handrail. Dory's, his bedroom, was at the back of the house, overlooking the garden. His mom kept her dope in an orange juice can hung under the heat vent. He used the same system for his bones. No one knew he had them, so why was he afraid they'd take them away? He held them in his cupped palms. They were warm and light. The shimmering whiteness had condensed down to one corner of his vision. Sometimes that meant he was going to get a headache. He hoped not. He wanted to work on this now, while he was alone. When he left his room, though, he crossed the hall into Calliope's instead of heading downstairs to Uncle Marv's workshop. Without knowing why, he gazed around him. The walls were turquoise. The throw rugs and bedspread pale pink. Nothing in here interested him, except that poster of Wilt Chamberlain her new boyfriend Neville had given her. It was signed, worth maybe $100. He stepped closer. He could never get Calliope to let him anywhere near the thing when she was around, but she took terrible care of it. It was taped to the wall, all crooked, sort of sagging in the middle. He touched the slick surface. Slick, but not smooth. Something soft and lumpy lay between the poster and the wall. What? White light pulsed up around the edges of his vision as he lifted one creased corner. Something black slithered to the floor. He knelt. With the whiteness, his vision had narrowed, but he could still see it was nothing alive. He picked it up. A wig. Or at least part of one. Byron tried to laugh. It was funny, wasn't it? Calliope wearing a wig like some old bald lady. Only it was so weird. The bones. This hair. The way Dory had disappeared. He had to think. This was not the place. He smoothed down the poster's tape, taking the wig with him to the basement. He put the smallest bone in a clamp. It was about as big around as his middle finger. He sawed it into oblong discs. The wig hair was long and straight, like Dory's. It was held together by shriveled up skin, the way he imagined an Indian scalp would be. What if Calliope had killed her little sister? It was crazy, but what if she had? Did that mean she'd kill him if he told on her? Or if she thought he knew? And if he was wrong, he'd be causing trouble for her and Uncle Marv and Aunt Cookie, and he might have to go live at home again. Gradually, his work absorbed him, as it always did. When Calliope came in, he had a pile of bone discs on the bench ready for polishing. Beside them, in a sultry heap, lay the wig, which he'd forgotten to put back. Byron looked up at his cousin, unable to say anything. The musty basement was suddenly too small. She was 3 years older than him, and at least 30 pounds heavier. And she saw it. She had to see it. After a moment, he managed a sickly smirk, but his mouth stayed shut. "What you doin'?" She didn't smile back. "You been in my room?" I didn't." She picked it up. "Pretty, ain't it?" She stroked the straight hair, smoothing it out. "You want it?" No clue in Calliope's bland expression as to what she meant. He tried to formulate an answer just to her words, to what she'd actually said. Did he want the wig? "For the bow I'm making, yeah, sure, thanks." "All right, then." He wished she'd go away. "Never'll be here tonight?" She beamed. It was the right question to ask. "I guess. Don't know what he sees in me, but the boy can't keep away." Byron didn't know what Neville saw in her either. "Neville's smart," he said, diplomatically. It was true. So was he. There was more hair than he needed, even if he saved a bunch for restringing. He coiled it up and left it in his juice can. There was no way he could prove it was Dory's. If he dug up the backyard where the tree fell, where he found the bones, would the rest of the skeleton be there? The police. He should call the police. But he'd seen Dragnet and Perry Mason. When he accepted the wig, the hair, he'd become an accessory after the fact. Maybe he was one even before that, because of the bones. It was odd, but really the only time he wasn't worried about all this was when he worked on the Gimbry. By Thanksgiving, it was ready to play. He brought it out to show to Neville after dinner. "That is a seriously fine piece of work," said Neville, cradling the Gimbry's round leather back. "Smaller than the other one, isn't it?" His big hands could practically cover a basketball. With one long thumb, he caressed the strings. They whispered dryly, "You play it with this." Byron handed him the bow. He held it awkwardly. Keyboards, reeds, guitar, drums, flute, even accordion. He'd fooled around with plenty of instruments, but nothing resembling a violin. "You sure you want me to?" It was halftime on the TV and dark outside already. Through the living room window, yellow light from a street lamp coated the grainy gray sidewalk, dissolving at its edges like a pointillist reverie. A night just like this, he'd first seen how pretty Dory was. The little drops of rain in her hair shining, and it stayed nice as a white girl's. Not like Calliope's. Hers was as naturally nappy as his, worse between her legs. He sneaked a look at her, while Byron was showing him how to position the gimbry upright. She was looking straight back at him, her eyes hot and still. Not as pretty as Dory. No. But she let him do things he would never have dreamed of asking of her little sister. Mr. Moore stood up from the sofa and called to his wife. "Mama, you want to come see our resident genius's latest invention in action?" The gimbry screamed, choked, and sighed. "What on earth?" said Mrs. Moore from the kitchen doorway. She shut her eyes and clamped her lips together, as if the awful noise was trying to get in through other ways besides her ears. Neville hung his head and bit his lower lip. He wasn't sure whether he was trying to keep from laughing or crying. "It's supposed to sound like that, Byron?" asked Calliope. "No," Neville told her. "My fault." He picked up the bow from his lap, frowning. His older brother had taken him to a Charles Mingus concert once. He searched his memory for an image of the man embracing his big bass, and mimicked it the best he could. A sweeter sound emerged. Sweeter and so much sadder. One singing note which he raised and lowered slowly, high and yearning, soft and questioning, with its voice, with its words. "I know you, Mama, miss me since I'm gone. I know you, Mama, miss me since I'm gone. One more thing before I journey on." Neville turned his head to see if anyone else heard what he was hearing. His hand slipped, and the gimbry sobbed. He turned back to it. "Lover man, why won't you be true? Lover man, why won't you ever be true? She murdered me, and she just might murder you." He wanted to stop now, but his hands kept moving. He recognized that voice, that tricky hesitance, the tone smooth as smoke. He'd never expected to hear it again. "I know your daddy missed me since I'm gone. I know your daddy missed me since I'm gone. One more thing before I journey on. I know you cousin missed me since I'm gone. I know you cousin missed me since I'm gone. It's 'cause of you I come to sing this song. Cruel, cruel sister, black and white and red. Cruel, cruel sister, black and white and red. You hated me. You had to see me dead. Cruel, cruel sister, red and white and black. Cruel, cruel sister, red and white and black. You killed me and you buried me out back. Cruel, cruel sister, red and black and white. Cruel, cruel sister, red and black and white. You'll be dead yourself before tomorrow night." Finally, the song was finished. The bow slithered off the gimbry's strings with a sound like a snake leaving. They all looked at one another warily. Calliope was the first to speak. "It ain't true," she said, which meant admitting that something had actually happened. But they didn't have to believe what the song had said. Calliope's suicide early the next morning. That they had to believe. Her body floating front down in the cistern. Her short, rough hair, soft as a wet burlap bag. That and the skeleton the police found behind the retaining wall, with its smashed skull. It was a double funeral. There was no music.
Wow. Nisi Shawl slips under your skin in the most unsettling ways, don't they? And few things are more unsettling than finding horror in one's own home. It hits you viscerally, in a way few things do.
In the mood for more horror? You might enjoy Spider King. After taking the rap for a crime he didn't commit, an incarcerated black man makes a dangerous bargain to earn his freedom. Or slip into the dark fantastic with the Shadow Files of Morgan Knox, in which a queer Afro-Latina PI in the 1930s is infected with visions of an eldritch apocalypse. Both shows are out now and available wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, whatever dimension you're in, safe travels.
You're listening to Tales Beyond Time, created and produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Listen away. Tales Beyond Time, Episode 17, features Bahamut, written by Thoraiya Dyer, and Cruel Sistah, written by Nisi Shawl. It is produced by Mary Asadolahi and Marco Palmieri, associate produced by Alexis Latshaw, and executive produced by Molly Barton. Hosted by Marco Palmieri and performed by Chanté McComick and Robin Ray Eller. Audio produced by Tie Def Studios. Additional editing by Nicholas Papaleo. Cover art by Kendall Thomas.